The scream of a hawk tore through the dawn mist, sharp as a blade slicing silk. Liang froze mid-step on the muddy path, his breath catching as the bird plunged from the gray sky, talons outstretched, and snatched a thrashing fish from the Yangtze's swirling currents. Blood flecked the water, a crimson omen against the river's restless churn. He shivered, not from the damp chill seeping through his tunic, but from the weight of what that day might bring. War was no longer a whisper in Gus's halls. It was a drumbeat, steady and growing louder. Liang was no soldier, not yet. At 19, his hands were more accustomed to ink and bamboo scrolls than the heft of a spear. But his mind, quick and restless, had caught the eye of men who forged destinies. That morning, as the sun bled orange through the haze, he'd been summoned to the king's pavilion, an honor that felt more like a noose tightening around his neck. The city thrummed with purpose. Along the riverbank, fishermen hauled nets heavy with carp, their shouts mingling with the clatter of armor as soldiers drilled in the mud. Boats bobbed in the current, sleek and low, their oars slicing water like knives through flesh. Wu was a land of rivers, and its people knew how to bend them to their will. Liang's pulse quickened as he passed a row of archers, their bows taut, arrows thudding into straw targets with a rhythm that echoed the hawk's cry. They were preparing for something vast, something that could swallow them all. He reached the pavilion, its crimson banners snapping in the wind, and ducked beneath the silk canopy. The air inside was thick with the scent of sandalwood and sweat. King Helu lounged on a low throne, his broad frame draped in robes of deep blue, a bronze sword resting across his knees. His eyes, sharp as the hawk's, flicked to Liang, then away, dismissing him as a shadow. Beside him stood Wu Zishu, the exaltern general, his face a mask of scars and fury. His hair hung loose, streaked with gray, and his voice rasped like a blade on stone as he spoke. "Chu's greed has overreached," Wu Zishu said, slamming a fist onto the map spread before them. The parchment trembled under his knuckles, its ink lines tracing the jagged borders of Wu and the sprawling mass of Chu to the west. "They've crushed Kai, gorged on their lands, and now their bellies too full to notice us sharpening our teeth." Helu's lips curled, a predator's smile. "A fat beast is slow to turn. You say the time is now." "Now," Wu Zishu growled. "Their king Zhao struts an ing, blind to the rot in his ranks. Nong was a fool drunk on numbers, 200,000 he boasts. But numbers don't win wars. We do." Liang lingered near the edge, his sandals silent on the reed mats. He wasn't meant to speak, only to listen, to soak in the words of men who'd seen blood spill and cities burn. Yet his eyes traced the map, Chu's bloated expanse, Wu's slender curve hugging the Yangtze. 30,000 against 200,000. A child could see the odds. But Wu Zishu's fire wasn't madness. It was something darker, something honed by years of exile and the memory of Chu's betrayal. "And how?" Helu asked, leaning forward, the sword glinting as he shifted. "They'll see us coming across the Huai. A straight march is suicide." Wu Zishu's scarred hand swept over the map, fingers jabbing at the rivers snaking through Chu's heart. "We don't march straight. We dance. Split our forces, 3 blades, not one. Boats to strike their flanks, shadows to bait their pride. They'll chase what they think is weakness and drown in their own weight." Liang's mind raced. He saw it, the rivers as veins, Wu's boats as venom slipping through them. Chu's army, vast and lumbering, could be lured broken apart. His throat tightened as he pictured the chaos, screams, splintered shields, the muddy churn of men dying far from home. He'd studied the old scrolls, the maxims of war. Strike where they're blind, bend where they're stiff, but this was no scholar's game. This was real, and it was coming fast. Helu's gaze shifted, pinning Liang like a moth to a board. "You boy, you've been hovering like a ghost. What's in that head of yours?" Liang swallowed, his voice a thread against the pavilion's hum. "The general's right, my lord. Chu's strength is their weakness. If we feign retreat, they'll overreach. The rivers favor us, swift boats, light feet. They won't expect us to turn and bite." A heartbeat of silence. Then Helu laughed, a low rumble that sent the banners trembling. "Bold for a scribe. Good. You'll help sharpen this plan. We move in 3 days." Wu Zishu's eyes narrowed, assessing Liang, but he said nothing. The weight of that stare lingered as Liang bowed and stepped back, his heart hammering. 3 days. 3 days until Wu's 30,000 faced Chu's horde. 3 days until the hawk's cry became the scream of men. Outside, the Yangtze flowed on, relentless, carrying whispers of blood yet to spill. Liang glanced at the water, at the boats slicing its surface, and knew he'd stepped into a storm that would either forge him, or break him. A low growl of thunder rolled across the plains, heavy and ominous, as if the earth itself rumbled under the weight of Chu's might. Dust swirled in the wind, stinging the eyes of the sentries perched atop Ying's towering walls. The capital sprawled like a beast at rest, its stone ramparts glinting with the last light of a sinking sun. Beyond the city, the horizon shimmered with the haze of campfires, hundreds, thousands, stretching west toward the Huai River. 200,000 men, armed with bronze and iron, their banners snapping in the gusts, a forest of spears poised to crush any fool who dared challenge Chu's dominion. The air thrummed with their presence, a pulse of power that could shake mountains. Yet within the king's hall, that power felt like a chain, dragging at the men who wielded it. General Nonghua paced the polished floor, his boots thudding against the tiles, each step a declaration of his disdain. His broad shoulders strained against his armor, the plates clanking as he moved, a bear of a man with a voice to match. "Woo!" he bellowed, his laugh echoing off the cedar beams. "A pack of river rats gnawing at our scraps. They'll scatter the moment they see us coming." Across the hall, Shanin Shu stood silent, his lean frame still as a reed in the wind. His dark eyes traced the map before him, its edges curling from the damp air. Chu's lands sprawled across the parchment, vast, unbroken, a titan among the petty states. Wu's slender strip along the Yangtze looked like a snake, coiled but small, easily crushed underfoot. Yet something gnawed at him, a shadow he couldn't name. He tapped the Huai River's ink-blue line with a calloused finger. "They've raided our outposts," he said, his voice low, measured. "Swift strikes, then gone. They're testing us." Nonghua waved a meaty hand, dismissing the words as if swatting a fly. "Cowards' tricks. Let them nip at our heels. It'll make their rout all the sweeter. 200,000 against their 30? We'll grind them to dust and be back in Ing before the rice wine sours." The hall buzzed with agreement, a chorus of captains and nobles nodding like reeds bending to the storm. King Zhao lounged on his throne, draped in silks of gold and crimson, a jade cup dangling from his fingers. His smile was lazy, indulgent. "Nonghua speaks true. Wu's a flea on a tiger's back. March tomorrow, end this nonsense." Shanin Shu's jaw tightened. He saw the numbers, yes, but numbers were a blunt tool. Wu's boats moved like shadows on the water, their raids too precise, too bold. He'd fought river folk before, slippery, quick, striking where you least expected. "We should scout their movements," he pressed. "Fortify the Huai crossings. If they're bold enough to raid, they're bold enough to fight." A ripple of scorn passed through the hall. Nonghua rounded on him, his bulk looming. "Fortify? Against what? Fishermen with spears? You'd have us cower behind walls while they scurry like rats." He jabbed a finger at the map. "I say we march, meet them head on, and drown their insolence in blood." The king sipped his wine, eyes half-lidded. "Enough, Shun. Nonghua will lead. You'll guard the rear. We've no time for caution, glory waits." Shanin Shu bowed, the gesture stiff, his mind churning. Glory. A word that blinded men faster than the sun. He stepped back as orders rang out, drums pounded, horns blared, and the beast of Chu stirred to life. By dawn, the army lumbered north, a tide of men and metal, their banners a sea of green and black. Chariots rumbled, wheels gouging the earth, while oxen hauled carts laden with grain and arrows. The ground trembled under their march, a force to shatter kingdoms. At the vanguard, Nonghua rode high, his helm gleaming, shouting commands that rolled like thunder. "Faster! Let Wu see their doom approaching." His captains echoed the cry, driving the ranks forward, a wall of shields and blades stretching wide across the plain. Behind, Shanin Shu watched from horseback, his gaze flicking to the horizon. The Huai lay ahead, its waters hidden by dust and distance. Too far to hear, too close to ignore. A scout galloped in, breathless, his mount lathered in sweat. "Wu's boats, they've hit another outpost. Burned the stores and fled east." Nonghua grinned, teeth bared like a wolf's. "Fleeing already. See, they've no stomach for us." He wheeled his horse, barking orders. "Pursue. Split the wings, run them down." Shanin Shu's hand tightened on his reins. "It's a lure," he muttered, too low for any to hear. The scout's words gnawed at him, east toward the rivers, Wu's domain. He scanned the ranks, the endless sprawl of men, their pace sluggish under the weight of their own might. Chu was a titan, yes, but titans moved slow, and the Huai's banks were treacherous, swamps, reeds, currents that could swallow an army whole. The thunder growled again, closer now, a warning in the sky. Nonghua pressed on, his laughter swallowed by the wind, driving Chu toward a foe he couldn't see. Shin Shu rode in his shadow, the map's lines burning in his mind. 200,000, a hammer raised high. But hammers were useless if they struck only air. The air hung thick with the scent of mud and reeds, a damp shroud cloaking the riverbank as dawn bled gray across the sky. Liang crouched low in the boat, his knees pressed against the sodden wood, the paddle's rhythm a heartbeat in his hands. Around him, 30 men moved as one, silent, shadows on the water, their breaths misting in the chill. The Yangtze's tributary snaked ahead, its currents whispering secrets only Wu's riverborn knew. Ahead, Chu's outpost loomed through the haze. A squat tower, its torchlight flickering like a wounded star, guarding a sprawl of tents and grain carts. Liang's stomach twisted. This was no drill, no scroll-bound theory. This was the spark to ignite a war. Wu Zishu stood at the prow, a jagged silhouette against the dawn, his spear glinting as he raised it. Now, he rasped, voice low but sharp enough to cut stone. The boats surged, or slicing the water, a pack of wolves closing on prey. Liang gripped his paddle tighter, his mind racing over the plan he'd dared suggest in Gus's pavilion. Strike fast, burn their supplies, then vanish. A feint to bait Chu's pride, to fracture their lumbering horde. King Helu had nodded, Wu Zishu had glared. Now, with the enemy in sight, failure meant more than shame, it meant death. The boats hit the bank with a soft crunch, reeds parting like a curtain. Wu Zishu leapt ashore, his boots sinking into the muck, and the men fanned out behind him, swift and soundless. Liang stumbled after, a dagger at his belt, his pulse a drumbeat in his ears. The outpost sentries slumped at their posts, drowsy from the night's watch, oblivious to the shadows creeping closer. A single shout broke the stillness, a Chu guard, eyes wide, fumbling for his horn. Wu Zishu's spear flew, pinning the man to the tower's wooden frame before the sound could rise. Blood sprayed, dark against the pale dawn, and the raid erupted. Fire the carts! Wu Zishu barked, his voice a whipcrack. Liang darted toward the grain stores, a torch thrust into his hand by a grizzled soldier. He hesitated, the flame trembling as he stared at the stacked sacks, enough to feed Chu's thousands for weeks. A shout snapped him back. Move, boy! He thrust the torch down, and the dry cloth caught fast, flames licking upward with a hungry roar. Smoke billowed, thick and choking, as the other raiders struck, arrows thudding into tents, blades flashing against the few guards who staggered from their sleep. Chu's response came too late. Horns blared, ragged and desperate, as men spilled from the tents, half-armored, their shouts drowned by the crackle of fire. Liang ducked a wild swing from a soldier's sword, the blade hissing past his ear, and drove his dagger up, feeling the sickening give of flesh. The man crumpled, and Liang reeled back, bile rising in his throat. No time to think, Wu Zishu's voice cut through the chaos. Back to the boats! They fled as the outpost burned, a beacon in the dawn, its smoke curling skyward like a signal to the gods. The boats shoved off, oars churning the water, and Liang collapsed against the hull, his hands trembling, streaked with soot and blood. Chu's survivors stumbled to the shore, loosing arrows that splashed harmlessly behind them. Wu Zishu stood unmoved, his scarred face lit by the distant flames, a predator watching his trap spring shut. They'll come now, he said, almost to himself. Nonghua won't let this stand. Liang wiped sweat from his brow, the outpost's glow fading as the boats slipped into the river's embrace. Will they split their forces? He asked, voice hoarse. Wu Zishu's lips twitched, a rare flicker of approval. They will. Pride's a heavy chain. Nonghua drags it like a fool. He'll chase us, and his army will crack. The boats glided east, threading through a maze of channels and swamps, the land turning soft and treacherous under the rising sun. Liang's mind churned, piecing it together. The raid wasn't just a blow, it was a lure, a splinter to drive Chu mad. He'd seen the map in Gusu, the Huai's tributaries, the boggy flats, the places where a vast army would flounder. 30,000 couldn't face 200,000 head-on, but a beast too big could be bled bit by bit. Hours later, a scout boat met them, its rower panting as he spoke. Chu's moving fast. Their wings are peeling off, chasing east and west. Nonghua's at the head, roaring for blood. Wu Zishu nodded, his eyes glinting like the spear at his side. Good. Let them run themselves ragged. The Huai will be their grave. Liang stared at the water, its surface calm now, hiding the currents below. The raid had worked. Chu was enraged, their unity fraying. He felt the weight of it, the lives snuffed out by his plan, the fire he'd set. But there was no turning back. The drumbeat of war had quickened, and Wu's dance had begun. Ahead lay Boju, where the trap would close, or where they'd all drown in Chu's wrath. The sun hung low, a dull red eye glaring through the haze, as the plains near Boju trembled under the weight of war. Liang stood atop a low rise, the wind tugging at his tunic, his breath shallow as he watched Chu's army sprawl across the horizon. 200,000 strong, their shields glinted like scales on a vast serpent, their banners a storm of green and black snapping in the gusts. Drums thundered, a relentless pulse, and the ground shook with the tramp of boots and the groan of chariot wheels. Wu's 30,000 felt like a whisper against that roar, a fragile thread stretched taut before a blade. Yet Liang's heart didn't falter. It raced with the thrill of what they'd set in motion. Wu Zishu's voice cut through the wind, sharp and steady. "Hold the line." He stood at the center of Wu's front, his spear planted in the earth, his scarred face a mask of cold fire. Beside him, King Helu watched from horseback, his bronze armor gleaming, his eyes locked on the enemy. The plan was theirs, Liang's spark, Wu Zishu's steel, Helu's will. 3 blades, not one. Wu Zishu to bait, Sun Ping to flank, and Liang's reserves to strike the killing blow. Chu's pride had brought them here, fractured and furious, and now the dance would end. Across the field, Nonghua's bellow rose above the din, a bear's roar. "Crush them!" Chu's line surged, a tide of metal and muscle, their vanguard charging with spears leveled. Wu Zishu raised his spear, and Wu's front, 10,000 strong, braced shields and thrust forward, a thin wall against the flood. Arrows flew, a dark swarm from both sides, thudding into flesh and earth. Liang flinched as a shaft splintered a shield beside him. The soldier's grunt swallowed by the clash of bronze on bronze. The lines met, and the air erupted with screams, the wet crunch of bone, the shriek of steel. For a moment Wu held, then broke. Wu Zishu shouted, his voice ragged, and the front retreated, stumbling back toward the rise. Liang's chest tightened. Planned, yes, but the chaos felt too real, the blood too thick on the ground. Chu cheered, a guttural roar, and Nonghua drove them harder, his wings spreading wide to envelop Wu's fleeing ranks. "They run," he bellowed, his helm flashing as he waved his sword. "Finish them!" But the retreat was a lie. Wu Zishu's men pulled back to a bottleneck, where the Huai's tributaries curled around the field, their banks soft with mud and reeds. Chu's vanguard plunged after, their chariots bogging down, their ranks tangling in the mire. Liang glanced left. Sun Ping's boats emerged from the river's haze, 15,000 strong, oars flashing as they struck Chu's exposed flank. Arrows rained from the water, cutting through Chu's archers, and Sun Ping's infantry leapt ashore, blades slashing into the chaos. Nonghua wheeled, his roar turning to a snarl, and sent his reserves, 50,000, to meet the flankers. Too soon, Liang thought, his pulse hammering. Chu's center thinned, their lines stretching like a bowstring pulled too far. Wu Zishu saw it too. "Now, boy!" he shouted, and Liang raised a horn to his lips, its wail piercing the din. From the rise, Liang's reserves, 5,000 hidden in the brush, surged down, a silent tide crashing into Chu's rear. Liang ran with them, dagger in hand, his voice lost in the howl of battle. They hit Chu's baggage train, scattering oxen and torching carts, then carved into the back ranks, where confusion reigned. A Chu soldier lunged at him, spear thrusting. Liang dodged, the blade grazing his arm, and drove his dagger into the man's side. He fell, and Liang pressed on, the world a blur of smoke and blood. Chu's line buckled. Wu Zishu's front turned, no longer fleeing but striking, a hammer against the anvil of Sun Ping's flankers. Nonghua roared orders, but his voice drowned in the panic. His wings were pinned, his center collapsing, his reserves spent. Liang saw him through the haze, a giant in armor, hacking at Wu's soldiers until an arrow found his throat. He toppled, and Chu's heart broke with him. The rout began. Chu's thousands fled, trampling their own in the mud, the Huai's banks swallowing men and horses alike. Wu pursued, relentless. Sun Ping's boats cutting off retreat, Wu Zishu's spears reaping a grim harvest. Liang staggered to a halt, chest heaving, as the field turned to a graveyard. The sun sank, painting the carnage red, and Wu's war cries rose above the dying thunder of Chu's drums. Helu rode forward, his face alight with triumph. "Boju is ours," he said, voice ringing. Wu Zishu nodded, blood streaking his armor, his eyes fixed on the horizon, toward Ing. Liang sank to his knees, the dagger slipping from his hand, the weight of victory heavy as the bodies at his feet. The dance was over, and Chu lay broken. But the river still flowed, hungry for more. The air over Ing stank of ash and ruin. a bitter haze that clung to the tongue like grief. Liang stood at the city's shattered gates, the wood splintered and blackened from Wu's torches, the once proud walls scarred by the fury of 30,000 avengers. The sun had barely risen, its light muted by smoke, casting long shadows across the streets where Chu's capital lay broken. Bodies littered the ground, soldiers, merchants, children, their silence louder than the war cries that had faded hours before. Liang's boots crunched on shattered tiles as he stepped forward, the weight of Boju's victory pressing down like a stone on his chest. Wu's army had swept in after the rout, a tide of blades and fire, chasing Chu's remnants to their heart. King Zhao had fled, his golden robes abandoned in the dust, leaving Ying to Wu's mercy, and Wu Zishu had none to give. Liang watched as the general strode through the wreckage, his spear dragging a trail in the dirt, his scarred face alight with a hunger that victory couldn't sate. He stopped at the royal tombs, their stone slabs cracked by time and neglect, and raised his voice to the sky. "You took my father, my brother, my home," he roared, as if Chu's dead could hear. "Now I take yours." Men surged forward at his command, axes biting into the tombs, spilling bones and jade into the mud. Wu Zishu knelt, smearing his hands with the earth, his laughter a jagged thing that made Liang's skin prickle. This wasn't triumph. It was vengeance, raw and endless, a wound that would never heal. Liang turned away, his stomach churning, and saw King Helu atop his horse, watching from a rise. The king's face was calm, almost serene, his bronze armor streaked with blood that wasn't his own. "A fine day," he called, voice carrying over the clamor. "Chu's Titan has fallen." Liang forced a nod, his throat tight. "And Nong Hua?" he asked, though he knew the answer. "Dead at Boju," Helu said, his smile sharp. Shenin Shu surrendered, kneels in chains now. Their armies scattered, their king a ghost. "This is ours." The words should have lifted him, but Liang felt only the weight. He'd seen Nong Hua fall, an arrow through his throat, the giant toppled by Wu's dance of blades. Shenin Shu's surrender had come later, his face hollow as he dropped his sword before Sun Ping's boats. 200,000, broken by 30. Liang's plan, the feint, the flank, the reserves, had worked, a scholar's dream turned to blood and ash. Yet as he looked at Ying's ruin, the cost clawed at him. How many had died by his hand, his mind? Helu dismounted, clapping a hand on Liang's shoulder. "You've a gift, boy. That head of yours won us this day. We'll need it again. Choose not the only beast in these lands." Liang bowed, the praise a bitter balm. "Thank you, my lord. But what now? Now?" Helu's gaze swept the city, the fires still smoldering, the cries of the living mingling with the wind. "We feast on their corpse. Then we sharpen our blades for the next fight." Wu Zishu joined them, his hands stained with tomb dirt, his eyes burning. "Qin stirs in the west," he said, voice low. "They'll come for Chu's scraps. We must be ready." Helu nodded, but Liang saw the flicker in his eyes, triumph tempered by strain. Wu had won, yes, but their 30,000 were weary, their supplies thin after the march. Ying was a prize, but holding it was another war. Liang stepped back as the king and general spoke, their voices fading into the hum of looting soldiers and wailing captives. He wandered to the city's edge, where the Huai's waters lapped at the banks, dark and restless. He sank to the ground, the dagger at his belt heavy against his thigh. Boju's field flashed in his mind, mud churned red, Chu's banners trampled, the screams of the dying. Then here, Ying's fall, a titan gutted by Wu's cunning. He'd helped forge this, a boy with scrolls and a spark, now a man with blood on his soul. The river flowed on, indifferent, carrying ash downstream. Victory, he thought, tasted like smoke, sharp, fleeting, and gone too soon. A horn sounded, sharp and distant, Wu's signal to regroup. Liang rose, brushing dirt from his hands, and turned back to the city. The Titan was dead, but the shadows of others loomed. He'd dance this dance again, he knew, until the river claimed them all. The Yangtze flowed silver under a crescent moon, its surface a mirror for the stars scattered across the night. Liang stood on Gus's riverbank, the damp earth cool beneath his sandals, the city's hum a distant murmur behind him. Weeks had passed since Boju, since Ying's fall, and the air no longer carried the tang of smoke or blood. Lanterns flickered along the docks, their glow dancing on the water, and the soft splash of oars marked a fisherman's late return. Wu basked in its glory, a victor's crown forged in mud and fire, but Liang felt no warmth in it. The river stretched before him, endless and unyielding, a witness to all they'd done. He traced a finger along the dagger at his belt, its blade dulled from Boju's chaos, its hilt worn from his grip. The battle played in his mind like a shadow puppet show. Wu Zishu's spear flashing, Sun Ping's boats cutting the Huai, his own horn signaling the reserves that broke Chu's spine. 200,000 felled by 30. A titan's corpse, left to rot in Ying's ashes. He'd stood in that ruin, seen Wu Zishu smear his vengeance into the earth, heard King Helu's laughter ring over the flames. Victory had been theirs, a scholar's plan, a general's steel, a king's will. Yet the weight lingered, heavier than the scrolls he'd once pored over in Gus's quiet halls. Wu Zishu's voice echoed in his memory, sharp as the wind off the water. Victory is a shadow, grasp it too long and it fades. He'd said it that day in Ing, his hands still dark with tomb dirt, his eyes fixed on a horizon Liang couldn't see. The general had been right. The feasting had ended, the spoils divided, but whispers now crept through Gus's streets. Qin stirred in the west, their armies massing to aid Chu's remnants. King Zhao, a ghost in exile, rallied what was left. Wu's 30,000, stretched thin by triumph, could not hold forever. The river carried those whispers downstream, a warning in its ceaseless flow. Liang knelt, dipping his hand into the water, its chill biting his skin. He thought of the hawk he'd seen that dawn in Gusu, its talons snatching life from the current. Wu had struck like that, swift, precise, deadly. But hawks tired, and rivers outlasted all. He'd grown in those weeks, from a boy with ink-stained fingers to a man who'd shaped a war. The cost was etched in him now. The outpost's flames, Boju's blood, Ying's silence. He wondered if Helu saw it too, the fragility beneath the crown, or if Wu Zishu's fire blinded them both. A horn sounded, low and mournful, from the city's watchtower. Liang straightened, his gaze lingering on the water. A rider galloped through Gus's gates, dust trailing in the moonlight. News from the west, no doubt. Qin's shadow, Chu's revenge. The dance wasn't over, it had only paused. He turned back, the dagger a steady weight at his side, and walked toward the city. The river flowed on, its echoes soft but unrelenting, a song of power won and lost, of blades that gleamed and then dulled. Liang stepped into Gus's glow, the stars fading above. The Yangtze whispered behind him, eternal, waiting for the next tale to unfold.